Morning. Right. What I want to talk to you about briefly today is this big movement on deca-only cycles. And rather than just say one thing, I wanted to give both sides. So there's a few people touting this, and the the reasoning they're giving behind it is bollocks. So what I thought I'd do is give the real reasons behind it. I've heard it claimed that it's receptor selective, deca that is, which it's not. I've heard it claimed that, well, it's given to AIDS patients. Yeah, there's a few studies on AIDS patients. Generally, doses are around 150 milligram a week, and the length of dose ranges from 6 to 12 weeks. The findings are based on lean body mass gain, and it does outperform testosterone. The only mention that I've ever seen towards anything else is just anecdotal evidence from the participants that they felt fine. Now, did some digging, and I can't find any studies, but I may be wrong on this because I haven't searched forever and a day, but I can't find any studies on nandrolones being used as TRT long term. But I did find a paper that looked at it from a theory point of view. And this is where, like I said, a lot of the argument being given supporting the deca argument is wrong. The effects that they're saying is right, but the mechanisms behind those effects is wrong. So I'm going to go through it bit by bit. So one argument is that it has a lower impact on the prostate. That is true. Another argument is that there's a lower impact on male pattern baldness. That is true. And another argument has a lower impact on sebaceous glands in the skin, i.e. less oily skin. That is true. Also, that obviously there's less estrogen size. That is true as well. Now, the argument given for the impact on prostate, sebaceous, and male pattern baldness is that the nandrolone is tissue selective, so it doesn't bind with those receptor sites correctly. Utter bollocks. Absolute codswallop. Within the body, we have an enzyme known as 5-alpha reductase. Most of you will be familiar with this. It's what converts testosterone to DHT. Now, in binding affinity, deca is stronger than test. Test is stronger than DHN, which is the 5-alpha reductase component from deca. But THT is stronger than all of them. Now, when you look into levels of 5-alpha reductase, there's very, very low levels of 5-alpha reductase within muscle tissue. So when test enters muscle tissue, very little gets converted to DHT. And so it's mainly test itself, its original form, that binds with the receptor. Test hasn't the strongest anabolic signal, and so it does all right. When deca enter, now if there was more levels of 5-alpha reductase, then tests would convert to DHT in muscle and give a lot stronger signal and be a lot more effective at building muscle mass. So when DHN enters the muscle, because there is low levels of 5-alpha reductase, it doesn't convert to DHN, it stays as deca and it attaches to the receptor. It has a higher binding affinity than testosterone, delivers a lot stronger signal, and therefore is more effective at building muscle mass in muscle tissue. The same effect happens on skeletal receptors as well, which is why deca is very, very good at a treatment for osteoporosis and improving bone density. Now, when we look at the prostate, sebaceous glands, and the hair follicles, these areas have high levels of DHT. So when deca enters these areas, it's converted to DHN quite readily. As a result, DHN is quite weak, has a weak binding affinity, and has a low impact on those androgen receptors that are there. When test enters these areas, because there's high levels of 5-alpha reductase, DHT It converts to DHT, has a higher binding affinity, and therefore has a much greater impact on the prostate, on sebaceous glands and oil production, and on the hair follicles and male pattern baldness. So when we start looking at suprapharmacological doses, the impact of taking testosterone at higher doses in these areas is a lot greater. So far, plus for deca. Really good. Now this is where this argument's grounded. Now, their argument that deca is better in these areas is correct. There's no disputing that. The mechanisms at which they explain of how it works is absolute bollocks. It's completely wrong. What I've just told you is how it works. It's to do with concentrations of 5-alpha reductase. So far, deca's winning. And the study that I found that was a theory on TRT from deca goes on to state that deca is far more suppressive than test. We know this, and it's due to its high binding affinity. So we know that deca is more suppressive, so therefore severe shutdown. And here is where the argument changes, because this study states, firstly, that there's a load more research that needs to be done, but secondly, that in their professional opinion, a low test base is going to be required to remain reasonable levels of DHT. And it does look at ED, erectile dysfunction, and it does say that, though it's not been studied greatly, what has been looked at has shown a high incidence of erectile dysfunction in patients with nandrolone. And this is due to the fact that there is a high amount of 5-alpha reductase, and DHT is required for erectile function. DHN just isn't strong enough to complete that function for a lot of people. So the old decadic thing isn't down to estrogen. There is a genuine scientific explanation of the fact that DHN is weaker than DHT, and therefore the signal for erectile is not as strong. It is a little bit more complex than that, but that's the easiest way of putting it across. So they know that ED, erectile dysfunction, is of concern, and they know that even at TRT doses, they advise some form of low dose test. So it'd be a 50-50 split test, nandrolone, so that sort of thing, but at least some test or some DHT in the mix. So that's the basic argument. So personally, what I think is a lot better is a low dose test. You can have very high dose deca, fine, but a low dose test. Now, moving on from this, getting into a bit more complex stuff, we know that deca has an impact in the brain. We know that deca reduces neuropeptide Y, affects short-term memory. We know it affects serotonin transportation across the brain as well. And this is where we've got to be a little bit careful. We know that test has a neuroprotective quality within the brain, but to what extent is a bit unclear. So a lot would depend on doses, but if you're running a high dose deca only cycle, then you're going to start having impact on the brain. To what extent, we're not really sure, because no studies have been done. Anecdotally, most heavy deca users report brain fog and poor memory. Mine's absolutely shot to shit, and I was always a big deca user. So there is evidence there, mainly anecdotal, that there is going to be an impact on brain. How much test is going to offset this? Not sure. Really aren't sure. There are also studies, now these are animal studies, these are rat studies, but these show an impact, a big impact of deca on the heart, far more than testosterone. I'm not sure on the mechanisms. I need to look into that more, but I would hazard a guess that it will be down to DHT. and it will be due to signaling of DHT against signaling of DHN. But I may be wrong with that. Like I say, I haven't looked into that. I've just over skimmed some studies showing. Now, this is in animal models, mainly rats, and the argument is rat studies don't translate. Well, no, maybe they don't, but maybe they do. The fact is, we don't know. So you can't carte blanche disregard these, but at the same time, you can't take them as read either. So you must take them with a pinch of salt, but enough to be wary. So, excuse me, cup of tea. Still morning, yeah. Deca has a lot going for it. It really does. It's low impact, boosts immune system, bone density increases. There is an upregulation within joints and tendons as well, and it's more effective test at building muscle mass. But it is more suppressive. It does have an impact on the brain. It can lead to erectile dysfunction, and we're not too sure what an absence of DHT in the body will cause, because there are certain functions within the body that are DHT based. So we just don't know, will DHN be enough or not? Now, anecdotally, a lot of people doing these deca-only cycles are doing them with D-bol. So they have got an androgen in there that will convert. So that's going to help. I'm not sure on how many have done purely deca-only cycles. And I know some people have done them and have struggled with them. But I'm not sure how many people have purely done deca-only cycles and what their feedback is. And unfortunately, the zealots that follow this are very unlikely to promote that it's fucked them up, even if it has. Now, the general consensus from what I've seen on promotion of this is that you do a 6-week cycle, off 4 weeks, 6-week cycle. Now, this is going to negate to some degree the side effects from deca, definitely. But I would suspect that when you start getting into the 3rd or 4th repeat of this, that you're going to start experiencing problems, if not before. Though the first 6 weeks, probably not. You'll probably get away with that quite well. It'd be longer term when you'd start to see problems arising. Now, going on to that, the theory behind the 6-week cycle is that androgen receptors shut down. Utter bollocks. This is based on one study, as far as I can tell. It's the only study that's been presented in evidence of this argument. Is a study, I think it was either oxandrolone or oxymethylone, I can't remember which, and at 6 weeks, gains reduced. And by the 12-week mark, the change between 6 and 12 was minimal in comparison to the change from 1 to 6. However, as we all know, at a certain dose, you'll grow to a certain point. Increase the dose, you'll grow more. So there's nothing to say that if at that 6-week point the dose wasn't increased, the gains would have returned, which would then disprove this theory of receptor shutdown. Also, there are studies using testosterone that have shown a sustained and linear growth from 1 to 12 weeks, and these were doses were quite a bit higher than normal. I think they were 300 to 600 milligrams. So this case, the dose is higher, therefore dose does not become an issue in linear growth. But it disproves that there is shutdown. Anecdotally, tons of evidence to disprove it. So that's a load of bollocks, to be quite honest. The other argument is myostatin expression. So that the steroids cause myostatin expression. Well, they don't. There's plenty of studies out there showing that steroids can suppress myostatin and actually increase follistatin. And part of the reason why YK11 has an effect on follistatin and therefore suppresses myostatin is because it's built on a steroid backbone. So that's bollocks as well. So there is no reason to run a 6-week cycle. It doesn't have any impact on the rate at which you gain. A lot of people stop gaining at 6 to 8 weeks. 1, because they lose momentum. 2, because they fail to linearly address their calorie intake. When a lot of people go on a bulk or a gaining cycle, they'll say, I'm going to eat X amount of calories. And that doesn't change. So at the beginning of the cycle, they're massively in calorie excess, but at the end of the cycle, they're probably calorie restrictive. Your calories should move up with you as you move up through weight and cycle. So there's one reason. A lot of people, 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes even sooner, start to lose momentum in the training and start to lose momentum When you first go on gear, it's special, it's precious, it's important. You get to about 6, 7 weeks, it's like, fuck it, you're just shoving it in, you don't care anymore. So there's a psychological change as well. These all play an impact on sustaining growth. But the biggest thing is that you're not linearly increasing intensity within the gym, increasing calories. And that's why stall. For some people, they may also start to upregulate clearance, which would mean that the half-life of the drug would drop by about 60%. So therefore, their blood levels would drop by about 60%. And that means effectively they've got lower levels in their system. And you find that sometimes when people test, when they first go on, levels are high. When they test at the back end of the cycle, levels are low, often blamed as being dodgy gear, when in fact it's not. It's just the body's shifting stuff quicker. So when I structure cycles, I start quite low, and then at 6 weeks, we have an increase to prevent this from happening. And that creates more linear progress. So that's just bollocks, basically. Simple as. But there you go. So simply, deca has a lot going for it. Medical opinion, from what I have found, and my personal opinion, is that you need some amount of DHT in there, particularly if you're going to run it for any length of period of time. But it does have a lot of positives, and which is why I'm a big fan of low test, high deca cycles. When you measure the two together, deca is a lot safer, a lot gentler on a lot of the systems within the body, and a lot more beneficial at building muscle mass. But, and this is the big but, nandrolone only, no, I do not think that's a good idea, particularly long term. And I think this fad, this trend, will settle. But I think at the moment there's a lot of false results because people aren't running truly nandrolone only cycles. They have something else in there, quite often dynamo. But in general, bloods are going to be a lot better on deca, without doubt, a lot better. Okay, so there you go. That's my take on it all. I've tried to put this argument across a few times, but I ended up just getting shouted out, basically. And it's just nonsensical ramblings. So you can't argue with a zealot. And you can't argue with an idiot that's convinced he's a genius. So leave him to it. So like I said, result is correct. Causation is incorrect. Right, gonna go. Take care. I've got some reports to get done for a presentation this afternoon, so I will catch up with you guys.